Hi everybody, I'm Todd Banner. Welcome to my channel. So I was working on this video, kind of looking back through images from all the way back to the dawn of the digital camera age, and it was turning into kind of a big video. So I'm still working on it, but in the course of doing that, I found some images that were really interesting. I'd kind of forgotten about them. As I've mentioned before, I spent a large part, most of my professional career as a technical sales rep, and I sold laboratory instruments mainly digital imaging instruments. I mean, I was selling digital imaging for laboratory research before I mean, there were digital SLRs, but they were tens of thousands of dollars. So it's kind of no surprise that I also am a photographer. In the course of doing that job, I traveled a lot. I traveled a lot by air. And I always took a window seat. And there's a reason. I like looking out and seeing what's going on below. Everybody else is engrossed in what they're doing on the plane. I mean, if there was work that I had to get done before I got to a destination, I would do that. But if there wasn't, I'd do some sightseeing. And a lot of times, we were flying over places that I'd actually been. So that was really pretty interesting. So in the course of this, going through all these images, I found images that I shot on a particular flight that are really pretty interesting. I'll put those up as a slideshow. Towards the end of my career, I worked for a company that was based in Upland, California. And if you're familiar with it, it's east of Los Angeles. So if you're familiar with the Los Angeles area, you know what that is. It's an area called the Inland Empire. So it's the eastern edge of Los Angeles County and the western edge of San Bernardino County. And I would fly from Chicago to Ontario International Airport at Ontario, California, which is only about 10 or so minutes from the office. So it's very convenient. However, there were no direct flights from O'Hare or Midway to Ontario. You always had to connect through somewhere. So I generally flew Southwest Airlines. And I flew Southwest so much, I was an A-list member, which meant even if I didn't buy a business select ticket, which gets you in the first 15 on the plane, because if folks outside the U.S. may not be familiar with Southwest Airlines, you don't get an assigned seat. You get into a boarding group, and there's A, B, and C. And early on when I was traveling, they didn't have things like business select, so you get to the front of the line. You had to show up at the airport early so that you get your boarding pass. And this is pre being able to check in online. Now, of course, you can check in online. But frequently I flew business select, which my company paid for. So there's always one of the 15 first on board the airplane. And I always made sure I sat on the side of the plane where I thought I was going to see something pretty interesting. Also, I made sure that I sat in front of the wing. Two reasons. One, you get off the plane faster. Two, if you're taking photographs out the plane window and you're behind the wing on an aircraft that has wing-mounted engines, such as the 737s that Southwest flies, and that's all they fly, they have no other aircraft. If you're taking pictures from behind the wing, the exhaust from the engine causes an issue. So you got hot exhaust gas coming out of the engine and mixing with the cold air, and it causes a refractive effect. I'm pretty sure it's what's called a Schlieren effect. So it's heat shimmer. And you can kind of, the first time I saw it was in photographs. I was like, what is going on there? Why is there a strip through this image that's blurry? And it suddenly dawned on me, I was on an airplane that had wing-mounted engines. So that's why I always sat in the front. This particular trip connected through Las Vegas to go to Ontario. In fact, Southwest, you either connected through Vegas or through Phoenix. So this particular trip connected through Las Vegas. And it was cloudy out of Chicago. So flying out west, there was nothing but clouds. And I thought, man, this is not going to be great. But when we got to the western edge of Colorado, the clouds cleared up. And so the route that flights take from Chicago into Las Vegas, you fly over practically all of the Utah national parks. So the jewels of, with the exception of the Grand Canyon, of course, the jewels of the southwestern United States national parks. So luckily on this trip, right at the western edge of Colorado, no clouds, it cleared up, and I was on the north side of the airplane, and I got just a view of Arches and Canyonlands and Bryce, Capitol Reef, it's between Canyonlands and Bryce, and Zion. And I always carried a small camera with me. In this case, it was a G9. No, not the Lumix G9. It was a Canon Powershot G9. I generally never carried an SLR with me on business travel because it's just too much. Here's a slideshow. And the interesting thing is every one of these parks my wife and I had been to prior to this flight. So I was able to pick out places that we'd actually stood. Anyway, here's a slideshow. I'll be back in a bit. As I said, on this trip, it was cloudy all the way from Chicago to western Colorado. But here is western Colorado. This is Grand Mesa, this flat-topped mountain with a huge area on top. It's actually over 11,000 feet. It's like 3,300 meters above sea level. Up at the top towards the left, you can see the Colorado River, which right there exits Debec Canyon into the Grand Valley. And this is not far from, a little bit east of Grand Junction, Colorado. Just a few minutes later, and we are flying just south of the Canyons of Colorado National Monument. Beth and I camped there once. We actually had the only time I've ever had something stolen out of a campsite, 2-gallon water jug while we were out hiking. Anyway, to the north of the canyons you see the Grand Valley, the town of Fruita, and the Colorado River. And here we are over Moab, Utah. And you can see Moab is in an interesting valley that the Colorado River cuts across rather than runs along. So that valley is actually, I think, a graben, which is a geologic feature caused by faulting. To the top of the frame, that's towards the north, is Arches National Park. And then over to the left, towards the west, is Canyonlands National Park, which the next frame is not too further along. This is Canyonlands National Park and what's called Upheaval Dome. And this was thought to be caused by a salt dome pushing up when I visited with my family as a kid. But it's now known that it's actually the remnants of an impact crater. It's actually not the original crater, it's just sort of what was left underneath, and the overlying layers had been eroded away to reveal that kind of shocked structure that results from a big rock slamming into the earth. Beth and I have actually hiked to the rim and stood on the southern edge of the crater, which is closest to the bottom of the frame. And not much further along, we come to Capitol Reef National Park and Water Pocket Fold. Water Pocket Fold is a monocline. So it's an interesting place to visit because when you're there, everything looks tilted, because it is. If you look up towards the top of the frame, that's close to where the campground is. And there's a hike you can take up from there, and it really is interesting because all of this rock is just very obviously tilted and sort of disconcerting in a way. But it's just another amazing place in the Southwest. Just to the west of Capitol Reef, you fly past the southern edge of the Aquarius Plateau. This is another high plateau. Again, about 11,000 feet, 3,300 meters above sea level. Large area. I mean, it's if you're up on that plateau, you can't really tell you're on top of a big flat mountain. But this is pretty easily visible. You can see some of it from Capitol Reef. You can also see it from Bryce Canyon National Park. It's Speaking of Bryce Canyon National Park, it's just a few more minutes and here it is. Another spectacular place to visit. We visited in November of 2008, and you would think that it would be pretty empty. Nope. A lot of tourists, especially from overseas, come to visit. And November in this area is relatively pleasant. You have to remember, though, the top of this plateau where Bryce is around 9,000 feet, so it can be quite chilly. You fly past the southern terminus of the park road that runs along the cliffs of Bryce Canyon, and you can actually see that road, and there is a little turnaround at a place called Rainbow Point. When you're standing on the rim of these cliffs, the view is amazing. You can see Navajo Mountain, which is like 80 miles, about 130 kilometers to the southeast. It's just amazingly clear skies out there. And finally, and just as you're starting descent into Las Vegas, is Zion National Park. And here you can see Zion Canyon cutting from upper right down diagonally to the left. And then there's a canyon in the foreground that runs over from the left to the right. That's Pine Creek Canyon. There's a really nice hike, and it's a very easy one to do up in that canyon that gives you a terrific view down Pine Creek towards Zion Canyon. Anyway, it's again an amazing place. But again, even in November, there were a lot of tourists there. But it's only another half hour, 40 minutes before you're on the ground. What an amazing flight. So that was the tour of the Utah National Parks and a piece of Colorado on my way to Las Vegas and connecting through to Ontario. I'll finish with a really actually kind of amusing story on a return flight which connected through Phoenix. So, and if you're a frequent traveler or even infrequent traveler, you know that when you're making connections, generally if they're nice, when you are either on approach to your connecting airport or after you're on the ground, the attendants will read off your connecting gates. And of course, that list of connecting gates is specific to the passengers that are on that plane. I mean, it makes no sense to read gates that nobody's connecting to, right? So, take off from Ontario Airport and arrive at Phoenix in a fairly short amount of time. That's not a large distance. It's about an hour maybe. Anyway, I think after we're on the ground, we're taxiing to the gate, and the attendant is reading off the connecting gates. And all of a sudden she says, and Burbank gate, and she goes, wait a minute, there's somebody connecting to Burbank? Now, for those of you not familiar with Los Angeles, Hollywood Burbank Airport, which Southwest flies to as well, is about an hour's drive from Ontario International Airport. So why anybody got on a flight to Phoenix to connect to Burbank, who knows? I was talking with some family members about this, and the only thing we could figure out maybe it was a traveler from outside the country who hadn't looked at a map, or maybe somebody was doing it just for the heck of it. Anyway, a little strange. Thanks for watching. If this was interesting, helpful, amusing, please like it. If you'd like to subscribe, I'd appreciate that as well. If you have any comments or questions, insights, any experiences you've had while involved in air travel, let the rest of us know. I'm Todd Banner. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.